Hey guys, Escort here. Hello and welcome to another episode of Star Wars Galactic Versus, the series where we do verses on a very large scale. I'm actually trying to take care of my puppy while recording this episode, so if you hear any barks, footsteps, chewing, or just other shenanigans, that's what it is. I'm sorry, but really at this point, it's pretty much unpreventable. So I think today may be my last Galactic Versus matchup, just for a few days at least. I've really been on a kick with these episodes, but I really should try to continue doing some of my other content as well. My top 5 lists and my lore videos, for example, haven't got a whole lot of love lately. So unless you guys really want more immediately, that's probably what the next few days will look like. Before we get too far into the video, I'd just like to give a brief update to the GawkBox.com leaderboards. Random Guy, of course, is still in the lead. However, right behind him is Randomer Guy, who I actually thought was Random Guy's alter ego, but apparently it's not. Down on the list, we also have Not So Random Guy. So really, the random guys in some form or another are dominating. However, also rounding out the top 3 is Caddy Gaming. So thank you to you 3 and thank you to everyone else who has donated and supported the channel so far. For those interested, you can tip me for free on gawkbox.com/EscortSlaughter just by playing mobile games. That helps me make videos every day while neglecting my other responsibilities. So for a while, I've wanted to take an in-depth look at the Republic, but I wanted to make it big. So today we're looking at what is, at least in my mind, the biggest Republic force ever assembled, and that's their navy at the Battle of Coruscant. This navy was comprised mainly of the Open Circle Fleet and the Coruscant Defense Force, and it's featured, of course, at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith. Going against the Republic will be the Covenant from the Halo franchise. I was, admittedly, unsure of which Covenant force to use. However, since we're going big with the Republic, why not go big with the Covenant as well? Also, just a bit of warning, this is one of those episodes where I'll say the word fleet so many times that it will actually start to lose meaning. This, by the way, is called semantic satiation. However, unlike the Republic, the Covenant is not protecting a city-wide planet. Rather, they're protecting their mobile, capital city of High Charity. So how powerful were these two fleets? That's the first question we're going to address on today's show. We'll start with High Charity, and for those who don't know, High Charity was essentially the Holy Covenant city and was also their capital and where most of the prophets lived. Given the immense religious significance of High Charity, and of course, we know how fanatical the Covenant are, High Charity must have been very well protected. There's also, of course, the fact that High Charity's population was in the tens of millions, and again, mostly prophets, so the leaders and the hierarchs of the organization. I think to say that High Charity had a serious defense force would be putting it lightly. It clearly has hundreds, if not thousands of ships protecting it. And specifically, High Charity wasn't protected by a single fleet, but rather an amalgamation of fleets. We first see High Charity and its escort fleet in Halo 2, and at that point, Cortana says that it's the largest Covenant fleet that she or anyone else has ever seen. But again, we need to know specifics. How large exactly was the protection around High Charity? Unfortunately, but unsurprisingly, these exact numbers have never been given in Halo canon. We do know a few things. For example, the Halo Encyclopedia suggests that the second fleet of Homogeneous Clarity may have been a moniker for the High Charity Defense Force. Given the use of the word Homogeneous in the fleet title, I would say that that does make sense when the fleet is supposed to be composed of several smaller fleets. Unfortunately, while that's quite interesting, it's not especially useful when trying to determine numbers. Besides for visual representations, which also aren't very helpful, the best picture we actually get of the fleet comes from the Fall of Reach epilogue. Thankfully, I always keep my copy of the Fall of Reach handy, so I can read you guys what it says. 100,000 probes darted and scanned with winking electronic eyes across the void of tangled non-spaces enveloping the Covenant inner empire. They gathered data and emerged into the cold vacuum, where they were recovered by the hundreds of supercarriers and cruisers in station-keeping positions around the massive, bulbous planetoid that dominated the heavens. That description is referring to the defense force around High Charity, and it does tell us a few things. We know that the fleet is comprised mostly of carriers and cruisers, which matches what we see in Halo 2, and it also tells us very vaguely that there are hundreds of ships. I'm going to now try to make some guesses about the actual size of the fleet, but just for some warning, this is going to be kind of nitpicky, kind of crazy, and I don't really know how close I'm going to actually be able to get. The problem is this line was written and probably never intended to be as deeply analyzed as it is being now, so take everything that I say here with a grain of salt. We know, first of all, that there were at least 200 of each ship type, given that it said hundreds of carriers and cruisers, although, admittedly, these hundreds could refer to the combined amount of ships. We also know that there's probably less than 1,000 of each ship type. The whole chapter is basically trying to explain the grandness and the scale of High Charity, so if the ships were over 1,000, it probably would have said so. The Covenant fleets that we've seen in other mediums also kind of give us an idea of the ratio of cruisers to carriers in any given fleet. Typically, most Covenant fleets will have a ratio of about 1 CAS class carrier to about 4 to 10 smaller CCS class cruisers. So taking all of that into consideration, specifically the use of hundreds and the kind of general idea we have of Covenant fleet composition, I think giving the fleet about 700 cruisers and 200 carriers would put it within our parameters, while also being pretty reasonable. That would also make the fleet the largest ever amassed by the Covenant, which again is what it's supposed to be, while not making it ludicrously large when compared with other scenarios. So aside from this 200 carriers and 700 cruisers, we also have to take fighters into account. Just to keep things simple, I'm going to say that all of these ships carried Seraph fighters instead of a combination of Seraphs and something else, because those were the main Covenant space fighter. Though I will say, I don't think starfighters are as widely used in the Halo universe as they are in the Star Wars universe. The CAS carriers have very large hangars, as the name would suggest, and each ship would have been able to carry hundreds of Seraphs into battle. I'll give each carrier a carrying capacity of 300, and I'll give each cruiser a capacity of 50. This gives us a total Covenant force of 200 carriers, 700 cruisers, and almost 100,000 fighters. And by the way, yes, we're not taking High Charity into battle. Alright, so let's now look at the Republic forces during the Battle of Coruscant. And the Battle of Coruscant, of course, was a very famous battle within the Star Wars mythos, so there has been a lot said about it. That makes for kind of a messy timeline and inconsistent force numbers. I mean, I've seen some numbers that say that the Republic had dozens of capital ships at the battle, while I've seen others that say they had tens of thousands. I think it's probably somewhere in between there. Let's now try to see if we can kind of narrow down a realistic number. In addition of the starship and vehicles collection, said that the attack on Coruscant was actually a surprise to the Republic and that they lost a large portion of their fleet, but still had 1,000 Venator Star Destroyers ready for the battle. I actually dug into this a little bit more, and in the novel by Karen Traviss, Order 66, a Republic Commando novel, it talks about the battle a little bit more. I had to look so long to find my copy of the book, but I'm glad I did. So here's one key quote. They've bypassed Separatist blocking, but the system must have overloaded by now. Knowing those useless barbs in procurement, they probably didn't add enough extra nodes to the network. Another thing they forgot to tell us about. Then a few pages later, well, when a few thousand warships have finished pounding 10 shades of OSIC out of each other and the planetary shields are lifted, etc., etc. Then there's another part where they talk about how another 1,000 Venators have just been added to the fleet. These are strange numbers, and this is quite a large sense of scale, even for the Star Wars universe. And I mean, also given the fact that this is Karen Traviss we're talking about, we have to take these with a little grain of salt. Of course, these are also from Star Wars Legends, so strictly speaking, I could ignore them if I wanted to, but I think it's better in this case to at least look to Legends wherever possible, since canon really doesn't help us out. Interestingly, the Karen Traviss book, as well as several other sources, have talked about the fact that the Separatist Navy actually brought in tens of thousands of ships. My point is that this was unquestionably a very, very large battle. Although I will say I do kind of question the multiple thousands of Star Destroyers in orbit. And I'm going to ignore those lines from Republic Commando, and I'll just take the fleet as it existed after the sneak attack. So that would have been thousands of ships, but not multiple thousands with reinforcements. I think in an effort to try to be fair to Star Wars and to try to downplay the kind of exaggeration present in Star Wars Legends, I'll say that the Republic had 1,000 ships. So specifically, that would mean that the Republic had 1,000 Venator-class Star Destroyers, and I say that because at this point in the war, I think that that was their general multi-purpose ship, and because during Revenge of the Sith, we don't actually see any other ship types on the Republic side during the battle. Venators were carrier battleship hybrids, so each ship carried with it a large complement of fighters. The actual fighter makeup for the ship would have obviously changed depending on the needs of the ship and of course the specific mission that it was doing. The Revenge of the Sith cross-section book gives a standardized loadout for the Venator, which also happens to match pretty closely the fighters that we see during the Battle of Coruscant. So I'm going to go with that. That gives each Venator about 192 V-Wings, 36 ARC-170s, and 192 ETA-2 Actis-class interceptors. That gives us 420 fighters per ship and a grand total of 1,000 Venators with 420,000 fighters. So that gives us the actual battle. On the Covenant side, we have 700 cruisers and 200 carriers with about 100,000 capital ships, while on the Republic side, we have about 1,000 carrier cruiser hybrids with 400,000 fighters. So how do the ships match up on an individual level? I think the first thing that you need to take note of is the fact that even the Covenant cruiser is larger than the Venator. I think the Venator is also questionably effective in its role as a straight-up assault ship. The ship, of course, did have turbo lasers, but focused more heavily on carrying and point defense. The Covenant ships, on the other hand, are basically built for frontline assault. The CAS ships are particularly deadly with very powerful energy projectors, which I think will be able to snipe out individual Venators without a whole lot of difficulty. However, unless we get into some ultimately pointless argument about the different strength between Halo ships and Star Wars ships and start pulling out crazy Legends numbers regarding power yields, I think even the CCS class cruisers pretty far outweighs a Venator in a straight up gunfight. However, although in my mind quite heavily outgunned both in weapon strength, most likely weapon number, and in range, the Republic does have something on its side. That, of course, is fighters. As I mentioned earlier, I think it's pretty likely that the Republic takes 4 times as many fighters to battle as the Covenant. Compounding the situation for the aliens is the fact that, at least in my mind, starfighters are more effective in the Star Wars universe, and that's largely because of the importance placed on them in individual battles. However, most of the fighters carried by the Venators are unshielded, and that's a significant disadvantage when going against Covenant technology. So here's how I think the battle turns out. The 2 fleets appear in the middle of space, across from each other. The first thing that each one of them do is what they're most effective at. For the Venator, that's launching its fighters. It will also be firing back, of course, with its turbo lasers, but the main thing it wants to do here is get as many fighters into space as possible. The Covenant, on the other hand, will probably focus immediately on getting as much fire on the Republic fleet as possible. I think that this will be problematic for the Republic. As the Venators are launching their fighters, they will most likely open their main hangar bays. This is a notable weakness on these ships. Thing is, I think many capital ships are going to go down before they can launch not only some of their fighters, but many before they can launch any of them. So suddenly 400,000 fighters and clear air superiority goes down to 200,000 in a closer matchup. Then you've got ships like the Actus class and the V-Wing, which aren't super effective unless in the hands of a Jedi. The Seraphs should be able to keep pace with most of the Republic ships, and their light shield will give them an advantage against the lighter ships, but they will probably have some trouble against the ARC-170s. Ultimately though, as I said, I just think the Covenant Navy is too powerful, and with their focus on actually capital ship combat, especially with the larger cruisers, the Republic is just not going to be able to fight back, and is not going to be able to launch their fighters quick enough to actually stand much of a chance. If we were talking about a similarly constituted Imperial fleet with, instead of Venators, Imperial II class Star Destroyers, then I think the Star Wars universe has a really good chance. Although I do still think that those 200 large carriers are going to cause a whole lot of destruction. But when we're talking about Venators, ships which, although probably pretty sturdy, aren't really meant for frontline combat in the same sort of way that an Imperial Star Destroyer is, I think it's clear that a large Covenant fleet is going to take the day. So I'm going to give this battle to the Covenant, and I say they win 8 times out of 10. I'm giving some wiggle room because I think there is an argument to be made that Star Wars is on a higher power level than Halo is, and if the Republic can get their starfighters out, then I think the Covenant is in trouble. But I don't know, 500 starfighters for a relatively small ship, it doesn't seem like it would be an instant thing to me, and I think the damage by that point will already be done. That is, however, just my opinion. I would love to hear from you guys down in the comments. Did you like this matchup? How do you think I did? Did I do a good job? Did I make some mistakes? Let me know. Of course, also take a second right now to vote in the upper right hand corner, and I'll reveal the poll results at the end of next video. Finally, if you haven't already, make sure to give me suggestions down in the comments for future matchups, and if you see a suggestion that you like, make sure to give it a thumbs up and a supporting comment. Anyways, thank you for watching, guys. As always, may the Force be with you.